My name's Danny Ludeman. I think I know all of you on this call. There may be a few that I have not met, but thank you for joining us this morning. We promise to be good stewards of your time, so we'll be ending our program exactly in 1 hour. And the reason we started these was really to give an opportunity to bring our community together, to talk about the importance of reentry and the role it plays specifically on racial inequality. Some of you have heard these facts before, but there are 30 million felons in this country. And so if you just count immediate family, mom, dad, son, or daughter, the total jumps up to about 100 million people in this country are affected by incarceration. And in terms of order, just quantitatively, not qualitatively, it'd be the third greatest social issue of our time. Poverty being number one, disease being number two, and then incarceration being number three. What's astounding to me, though, when it fits into the racial inequality theme and subject, is that of those 30 million felons, 12 million would be African American, and 8 million would be either Hispanic or Latino, the brown community. So you're looking at, roughly a third of the population is either black or brown. And this, when you get into this closely, it's quite evident that due to hundreds of years of racial bias, whether unconscious or conscious, has devastated hundreds and hundreds of black and brown communities all over this country. And it affects clearly the black and brown population more so than any population. And at the root cause of having a disproportionate number of African Americans and Latinos in prison is childhood trauma. And it's very, very sad when you look at the numbers. Just by being born in a particular place, in a particular time, due to no fault of their own, millions of children are growing up in places that have poor housing, poor education, high crime rates, high drug usage. And so this is one of the themes that we want to talk about today. And specifically, that's why Concordance was set up, to specifically address this problem by healing our population first, then gradually employing, then finding wonderful low-income housing, and reuniting our participants with their children. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jill to give you a little bit more information. Jill Lewin is our head of marketing, development, and communications at Concordance. We're very fortunate to have her. So Jill, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Danny. Good morning, everybody. I wanted to start off, Danny shared a couple of the facts around reincarceration, but I wanted to share a video that we've created that it hasn't been put out public yet, so I guess we'll consider this our premiere of it, but it will be put out on our social media and shared on our website, but I think it speaks to Danny's points. So give me grace for a moment while I share the screen. Actually, let me share sound with that. Otherwise, it's not going to work to watch a video. Okay.
There's one major societal issue that few people are talking about. Nearly 100 million people in our country are impacted by mass incarceration. There are approximately 30 million felons in the U.S., and 60% of them are black or brown. Most incarcerated individuals experience childhood trauma by the age of 9. And once they are released from prison, 77% will be rearrested within 5 years. Concordance has reduced reincarceration rates among our participants by 44%. With your support, we can break this devastating cycle and give people a real first chance. Join us. Visit firstchancecampaign.org today.
So again, just a brief video kind of touching on those facts and the importance of how much reincarceration really does disproportionately affect our communities of color. And to Danny's point, that is what we are focused on here at Concordance. And today for our Rise and Shine virtual event, want to welcome everybody, take that opportunity to personally welcome you. And then also share with you a couple things. You might have seen that President Biden and his administration recently named April, so the last day of the month, we're getting in there at the end of it, April 2021 as Second Chance Month. And while we love the fact that President Biden and the administration are shining this very much needed light on reentry and the resources that are needed around it, you know, to Danny's point, we don't really consider it a second chance, we consider it a first chance, because a lot of our participants have been affected by childhood trauma, things that, you know, as they are affected by in their childhood, that often ends up leading to mental health disorders, substance use disorders, and that has a whole ripple effect of issues and co-occurring conditions, as we say. And I think some of those include, you know, people dropping out of school. So a lot of justice involved individuals have a median education of 9th grade. They have little to no job or work experience because they end up in the justice system, and then the cycle of reincarceration takes effect. And between that and then being born in communities where there isn't the support that some of us are used to and some of us have had the privilege and benefit of, they were born in a situation they never had their first chance. So we love the attention around Second Chance Month, but really to us, it's giving people the first chance that they deserved. And then in addition, as if Second Chance Month is not enough, this is actually National Reentry Week as well. So I think it's very fitting that we're getting together and sharing information about what we can do to make a difference with this population. So I am excited to share our agenda for today. We have TJ Kingsbury talking about trauma. And then we'll have Rod Nunn and Tom Grant talking about a Healing First education and employment model in our Concordance Employment Agency. We'll have Danielle Landaway from Barnes Jewish Hospital. She is one of our employment partners. And then we'll have a participant join us at the end to talk about his testimonial. So with that, it is my privilege to introduce my teammate, TJ. He's been a part of our Concordance team for over 4 years, and he's a licensed clinical social worker. He has a lot of training and certifications in the trauma area. So I'm really excited to have him talk with us today. And some of that experience includes being a certified clinical trauma professional, a trauma-informed child welfare professional, and he's participated in the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's training of how being trauma-informed improves criminal justice system responses. It's a lot to say, a lot of credentials to say that we are very excited to have TJ teach us a little bit about trauma and the role that it plays in incarceration. So TJ, I will let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Jill. Good morning, everybody. I just want to echo Jill and Danny, and thank you all for taking time to be here this morning, especially to hear about trauma, which can be a heavy topic any time of day, but especially, 9 a.m. on a Friday. So I'm going to do my best to not make it too heavy and still get you some good info. So when we start to think about trauma, the word trauma itself comes from the Greek word for a wound. And so if you think about a wound in a physical sense, what do we know about wounds and how they heal? We know that they come in many shapes and sizes. We know that there are different types. There's open wounds, like a scrape, a puncture wound, abrasion to the skin. And then we have closed wounds, things that maybe aren't as easy to see or are more internal. But each type of wound is going to have its own distinct characteristics, and different wounds are going to affect different people in different ways. A lot of our past wounds may not leave any mark at all. Others maybe have healed and left a scar. But no two people are going to experience a wound the exact same way, even if it happened in similar circumstances. But what we also know is that if we don't receive proper treatment, it's going to complicate that healing process. Maybe minor wounds will heal up on their own. You don't really have to do anything. No treatment is needed. But if you have an injury and it's neglected, it's going to get worse. And that worsening can lead to other, just day-to-day problems. And then think about, what if something outside of your control is constantly re-wounding or constantly maybe ripping that scab off? you're never really able to heal, right? Jill, if you would pull up the slides, I would. Thank you so much. So to really understand trauma, you have to know what the 3 E's are. These are event, experience, and then the effects. The event is the actual traumatic experience or even a perceived threat of physical or psychological harm, or the lack, withholding, or control of material or resources that are crucial to health and development. This could be a one-time thing, or it may be ongoing repeated events. But trauma is personal. Each person's idea of what is traumatic is going to be different depending on various different things and how they experience these events. So how someone is assigning meaning to the event. No one else can say if something is traumatic other than the person and their perception. And then finally, the effects of that, the results of the person's experience of that event. It is going to be different, again, because it's personal. 2 people could witness a car accident, and depending on social supports and coping strategies and all that, for one person, it may be no big deal. And for somebody else, it may be an ongoing problem. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so we have different types of trauma. We've got our private event trauma. This would be any type of abuse, domestic or interpersonal, sexual, verbal, emotional, spiritual, financial. These types of events take place in secret. The abuser may threaten to harm the victim or the survivor if they talk about it. For children especially, they don't realize usually what's happening isn't normal, but they may start to feel isolated and cut off due to their inability to talk about it. There's going to be a sense of loss, maybe a loss of innocence, of safety, of autonomy. But again, only the person experiencing that event or events can define what has been lost for them. And then we have public event trauma. These would be things like a car accident, a natural disaster. They're often viewed as, things that are outside of someone's control. It's discussed with others. You share your experience. There's still a sense of loss, but there's not as much judgment attached to the person that is involved in this. You can't control that a tornado came through your town. And there's usually a lot of support in the very beginning. But as time goes on, people tend to be less comfortable providing that support if the person experiencing the event had support at all. Next slide, please. And then we have community trauma. So this is a combination of experiences that negatively impact a community, or it could be an event that impacts a few people, but it has a lot larger consequences. We don't often focus on trauma outside of the last 2 types, outside of those interpersonal experiences, but we need to recognize how community traumas can have the same potential impacts as interpersonal. Usually we see people feel one of 2 ways during these community type events, either pride, I'm part of something and I am overcoming it, or hopeless. This is my future. This is who I am, no matter what I do. Community trauma is often very normal for our participants that we work with. It's just another day for them to experience ongoing, traumatic events in their community. It's part of life. And this photo here is taken from August 2014. It's a photo from after Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson here. And one of the protesters, his name is Edward Crawford, and he just happened to be captured. It's a can of tear gas in his hand, and he's actually picked it up off the ground after it was launched into the crowd, and he's throwing it back. And he was later charged with assault and interfering with a police officer. Edward died in May of 2017 of a self-inflicted gunshot wound that was later determined to have been a suicide. Although not everyone who knows him necessarily believes that to be the case, but the impact of being a part of what took place in Ferguson back in 2014 had an ongoing, lasting impact on him that eventually led to his death. Next slide, please. And this is where we see chronic trauma or toxic stress. Chronic trauma is you're experiencing these highly stressful situations, maybe multiple instances of the same traumatic event, or multiple traumatic events happening to the same person, or ongoing environmental or community trauma. It's constant. When we experience a highly stressful situation, it triggers the release of certain chemicals and hormones in our bodies. We're flooded with all of these different things, and we go into fight, flight, or freeze, right? It's this automatic response. You don't get to choose how you're going to respond. But fight, flight, and freeze, it's very helpful to keep us alive during a highly stressful situation. I know if a bear walks into the room, we're all going to do one of these three things. Some of us are going to fight the bear because that's just who we are. Some of us are going to lay down and hope that the bear, messes with somebody else. And some of us are going to run and just, assume that we're going to run faster than anybody else in the room. But we don't get to pick. And that's really great when there's a bear, walking into the room. But what do you do when that bear is at home with you every day, or that bear is right outside your front door every time you leave? It causes chronic trauma, causes the most devastating impact on someone's overall functioning. Things like, living in high crime areas or violent neighborhoods, being born into poverty, not having enough food. Community trauma is essentially chronic trauma. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's a whole lot happening on this slide. And so I'm going to kind of touch on pieces of it. But there was a study done it started in 1995, and then it was published in 1998, called the ACEs study, or the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. And it took place kind of on accident. There was a Dr. Felitti, who worked for Kaiser Insurance, and he ran an obesity program. And he started to see that people were dropping out of the program as they started to lose weight. They were making great progress, and about 50% dropped out or failed. And he couldn't figure out what was going on. And so he started doing more of an investigation into the patients' histories, and he determined that there was a common factor, and that almost all of the patients that were dropping out of the program had been through some sort of childhood sexual abuse. And they all started to report that losing weight became a trigger for these past traumas to resurface. The participants of the ACE study, it was expanded after that. He started to see that there was so many more things happening. And he came up with the ACE survey, which has 10 different events that fall into three main categories of adverse childhood experiences. You have childhood abuse, which would include physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Childhood neglect, which would include both physical and emotional neglect. And then family and household challenges, which would include living with someone who used drugs or alcohol, has a mental illness, or had attempted suicide, experiencing the separation or divorce of your parents, witnessing domestic violence in the home, or a family member that was incarcerated. Each event counts as one. So something could happen to someone 200 times, and that would still only be one on the ACE survey. But if you look across to the second box, you start to see the different ways that this impacts people. Higher ACE scores have been linked to a lot of risky behaviors. People are more likely to use drugs or alcohol, to smoke cigarettes, to potentially perpetrate domestic violence, to struggle with mental health, obesity. And then if you continue to the third box, there's even more long-term physical health problems, societal problems, incarceration, increased risk for those negative education and employment outcomes. They surveyed 17,500 adults during this study, and since that original study was published, there's been several others. There's definitely more than just 10 types of adverse childhood experiences, but this was the starting point. Next slide, please. And so one of the things that really came out of that study that I always find very impactful is the demographic makeup of those 17,500. 75% of the study participants were white, 11% were Latino, 7.5% Asian or Pacific Islander, and 5% were Black. They were middle class, mostly middle-aged. 36% had attended college. 40% had college degrees or of some kind or higher. They were all insured. They all had jobs and great healthcare, and the average age was 57. This is not them. This was us. This is everyone. Next slide, please. And so what was learned is more than 50% of the general population have experienced at least one traumatic event per that ACE study. And more recent studies are showing that the rate's actually as high as 2/3 of the population. 25% of the adult general population has experienced 2 or more. 1 out of 16 adults has experienced 4 or more, and 1 out of 22 has 6 or more. And so what I've done here is just done a side-by-side comparison. For our participants, an average class of 50 participants, we asked them to self-report and take this ACE questionnaire, and 96% of our participants had experienced at least one adverse childhood event. 56% experienced 4 or more. The average number was 5. In the original study, it showed that about 1 in 1,000 people reported an ACE score of 8, 9, or 10. For our participants, 20% reported an ACE score of 8, 9, or 10. Kids with toxic stress, they live so much of their lives in that fight, flight, or freeze mode. They respond to the world as it's a place of constant danger. Their brains are overloaded with those stress hormones. They don't get to focus on things like learning or developing healthy relationships. They don't feel they can trust adults. The people that were supposed to keep them safe maybe failed to do so. There's a lot of frustration and anger, and they start to cope any way they can. Maybe cigarettes, drugs, alcohol, inappropriate relationships, overworking, overachieving, anything they can do to escape, but they don't see it as a problem because it's a fix for them, for that shame, that fear, that anger. They may end up in prison. They are not going to be able to heal from these traumas that they've experienced and will continue to experience during incarceration. They're operating in survival mode. They're doing what they've always done to stay alive in the world of chaos. And that doesn't go away just because they have been released from prison. At Concordance, we spend a lot of time trying to create an environment where our participants are able to begin to heal and address these past wounds. We can't simply, brush aside the pain that they've experienced. So if we go back to the origin of the word trauma coming from the Greek word for wound, just as people respond to wounds differently, they're also going to heal differently. But we do heal. Healing can't take place without the right conditions. But when those conditions are provided, we are going to adapt. Our participants are incredibly resilient. The quality of the healing conditions makes such a world of difference in physical and emotional wounding. Once a person is really given the resources that they need to heal, healthcare, time, social support, validation, spiritual guidance, emotional wounds do start to heal. They may be left with an emotional scar, but again, even when a scar is given proper attention, it becomes a part of us and part of our story. And to me, that's just a really great metaphor for the resiliency of our participants. We spend a lot of time helping them to see that they're more than the things that have happened to them in their lives. They're not broken, they're not damaged, they're not disposable. We're not here to judge. We're here to help them build trust and to start to heal through these day-to-day interactions. We have different activities that we do, but one of them is one of my favorites. We have them is part of their life plan workbook that we do with them. We give them some prompts that can help them create what we call an I am poem. We ask them, things like, if you were a song, what song would you be? If you were a movement, what would that look like? And it's a way for them to kind of discover who they are outside of all the things that they have experienced or been through. We recently had one participant who shared with us that he's staying in our sober home, and he shared that he goes outside in the morning and he looks around at the trees, and he sees deer and squirrels, and he said, I even saw a turkey one time, and suddenly I realized, wow, I never realized how stressful it was to have to dodge bullets every day until I didn't have to anymore. And so I'd like to end with just some of our participants' words from their I am poems. One of the prompts, what weather best describes you? And one said, the fall, I'm mixed with hot and cold. Another said, spring, I'm in my stage of regrowth and I'm blooming. What word is hiding behind your eyes? Pride, because after everything I've been through, I'm proud to be where I am today. Joy, I have finally found joy in my life. And finally, if you were a movement, what would it be? Bounce, like a basketball, because every time I hit the ground, I bounce back. So, thank you all very much.
That was incredible. Thank you so much, TJ. Appreciate you sharing your knowledge and sharing experience of some of our participants' stories and their experiences. It is a powerful and very heavy topic, to your point, for 9 in the morning, but it's a topic that we need to talk about a lot more. So thank you for that.